Hey guys, Gaston with Rough Country. Today we're installing this 2.5-inch lift on this Jeep JL. Let's get started. Now the first step is going to be to remove the factory wheels and tires. But before we do that, let's go over what's in the kit. This kit's going to include our coil springs front and rear, our sway bar links front and rear, and our bump stop spacers front and rear, as well as our M1 monotube shocks specifically for the 2.5-inch lift. That's the lift. Let's get to installing it. The first step is going to be to mark and disconnect the front drive shaft from the front differential. We'll get that up and out of the way. You don't want to let it droop. You can damage the boot. So I've got a strap. We'll strap it up and out of the way and move on to the next step. Now, in order to remove our factory coil and install our lifted coil, we need the axle to drop down. For that to happen, we've got to disconnect some stuff, starting with the lower sway bar mount. After that, we will remove the bolt for the lower shock mount. While we're over here, we'll go ahead and disconnect the brake line bracket from the lower control arm. We'll hop up and disconnect the vent line from the differential. Then we'll jump over to the passenger side. We'll disconnect the wire loom from the upper control arm, unplug the 4x4 actuator, get its sway bar link disassembled, as well as the lower shock mount on that side. Then we'll loosen up the upper and lower control arm bolts, not to remove them, just to take out any binding that may be there, so that when we lift the Jeep up, the axle stays put and gives us plenty of room to remove and replace the coils. All right, now we're gonna loosen up the upper and lower control arms, and we'll be ready to lift the Jeep up and remove the coils. With our items disconnected and our control arms loosened, we're ready to raise the Jeep up and leave the axle on the jack stands. Now, if you're doing this at home, you've got the Jeep on jack stands and you're actually gonna lower your jack, but the process is gonna be the same. We're increasing the distance between the two so we can pull the coils out. A little lift. Come forward with it. Bring it down. Now we'll go back with our Rough Country coil and making sure that the end of our pigtail indexes with the end of the seat on the axle. Before you seat your coil in place, go ahead and take your bump stop spacer, put it up inside the coil, and then seat your coil. And that way we can bolt it in from there. And then we'll drop our supplied hardware in and tighten it down. Our next step is going to be to remove the upper shock bolt and factory shock. All right, now we're going to install the Rough Country front shock, the M1. Just make sure that your eyelet is offset to the outside of the vehicle. Let me get on the passenger side and install the shock on that side. Then we'll be ready to swap out for our longer sway bar links and reconnect everything we disconnected. That includes the vent for the differential, the brake line brackets on both lower control arms, the wire loom on the upper passenger control arm, as well as the 4x4 actuator. Then we'll be able to put the wheels and tires on the front, set it on its own weight, and reconnect the track bar and tighten up the upper and lower control arms. Now I can reconnect the front drive shaft because everything else that's left up here, tightening up the sway bar links, tightening up the control arms upper and lower, as well as reinstalling the track bar, needs to be done with the Jeep sitting on its own weight. So we'll go ahead, reconnect the front drive shaft, and then we'll move to the back and install the lift there. Let's move to the rear. I've already moved the jack stands to support the rear axle, and we'll get started with the installation back here. Now, this is not quite as involved as the front, but it is similar. We'll start by removing the track bar bolt on the axle side. Then we'll go ahead and remove the lower shock hardware as well as the lower sway bar link hardware. Then we'll raise the Jeep, leaving the rear end on the jack stands. Now that's what we'll do since we have it on a lift. If you're working at home and you've got the Jeep on jack stands, you'll lower the jack to lower the rear end. Either way, we're making more room so we can pull the coil out. While we've got the coil out, we'll go ahead and install our bump stop spacers. Once we've got those installed, we'll go ahead and remove the sway bar links completely, as well as the factory shocks. Then we'll have plenty of room to add our rough country lifted coils. Then we'll go back with our extended sway bar links and our extended shocks. After that, we can set the Jeep on the ground and tighten everything up. We've got our track bar disconnected at the axle. We've got our lower shock mount as well as our lower sway bar link unbolted. Now we're going to raise the Jeep up, give us plenty of room to remove the coil, and we'll continue from there. Let's install our bump stop spacer. This is actually going to increase the height of the landing pad for the bump stop. All right, now we're going to install our extended sway bar link in the rear using the supplied hardware at the top, being sure to put the washer on the bolt head side and the sway bar link to the outside of the sway bar. Then for the bottom, we'll reuse the factory hardware. I'm going to snug these down, but I'll do the final tightening once it's on the ground. All right, I'll install the passenger side link, then we'll be ready to install our extended M1 shocks. Now we're going to install the M1 monotube shocks. In the factory location, we're using the factory hardware. All right, we'll put our splash guards back in and we'll be ready to set it on the ground. Our 2.5-inch lift is fully installed. We've got our wheels and tires on. Now we can bring it down, set it on its own weight, reinstall our front and rear track bars, and tighten those control arms back down. And with our front and rear track bars reinstalled and tightened down, that completes the installation of this 2.5-inch lift on a Jeep JL. Installation is easy, and you can do it in the weekend at the house. It'll take your Jeep's attitude from something that looks like it delivers mail to something that dominates the trail. Check out this 2.5-inch lift and many other JL accessories today at roughcountry.com.